As we wrap up reading Crispin, we're going to talk about the hero's journey as a review and get us ready for an essay test that we're going to do on Friday. So you have a piece of paper that has some notes on it. You're going to be taking some notes that refresh your memory on what the hero's journey was, and then we're going to talk about how they relate to Crispin. So the hero's journey is a cycle, a circular pattern in which our character starts off in the ordinary world, and we describe what his status quo is like, how he travels through all of these different stages in a special world, and ends up back in a new kind of ordinary world. And where this is kind of a cyclical pattern, we compare it to a plot diagram, very similar, but this is more linear, where we look at the exposition, the rising action, and so on. But it's just another way to summarize, but maybe in a little bit more detail, giving a little bit more meaning to the story. So you're going to take some notes right now. The top of your paper, you'll see that it says Hero's Journey, and underneath that it says the status quo, and then there's a line there for you to take some notes. Don't write in the box. We're going to write about Crispin in the box. So on the line, the status quo is where we meet our hero, and we learn about his or her ordinary life. So when we think about Crispin, and again, that's part of the exposition. When we think about Crispin, he lived in a small village. He's poor. He's shunned by everyone, mistreated, especially by John Aycliffe. His father's dead, and his mother just died. Okay, so you're going to pause the screencast, take your notes. Here's what you should be writing on the line, and here's what you're writing in the box. So we're looking at how it relates to Crispin. Then something happens. We call that the call to adventure. Our hero, in this case Crispin, stumbles upon or is sent on an adventure. It's not usually something that they're looking to do. It's just something that just happens. And if this event didn't happen, the character's life would go on and on and on the same way, and nothing, there probably wouldn't be any kind of interesting story. So when we think about the story of Crispin, what changes his life? He would have continued living in the village. He would have continued being poor and struggling and being shunned. But what happens that changes that? Well, he's in the middle of the woods on a dark night, and he awakens to some voices, and he overhears John Aycliffe talking on a secret message. And that event changes his life forever. Now they hunt him down, and they're trying to kill him. So the call to adventure is when Crispin overhears this conversation in the woods with John Aycliffe. This, in a plot diagram, would be called the inciting incident. Again, his life would have gone on the same. There would be no rise or fall if that didn't happen. So then we have the refusing of the call. Now this doesn't always happen, but the refusing of the call, our hero doesn't want to go. But some catalyst or force encourages him or makes him go. So when you think about Crispin, he didn't want to leave the village. Well, what causes him to have to go? He's being hunted down. He's been declared a wolf's head. And they're making him leave because if he doesn't, someone's going to kill him. So you're going to pause the screencast, jot down what you want to for your notes, and then continue. In this, we're going to start our rising action. This is our conflict.
We do have some bus changes, so listen up.
All right, let's try this again. So our next stage, stage 3, is crossing the threshold and meeting the mentor. So go find that. And on the lines, we're going to add our notes. In this stage, someone or something helps the inexperienced hero. Crispin is not very familiar with this new world, and so someone's going to have to help him. And so in this case, we would say this is still part of the rising action. Most of the story is going to revolve around this spot. Okay? So I want you to think about in the story, I'm not going to tell you anymore, but I want you to start thinking about how would you say that in Crispin we meet this crossing the threshold. Who it is that helps him. And give us maybe some details about that. In stage 4, we experience the test allies and enemies. Allies are friends, enemies are foes. and we experience some trouble. And it's really the bulk of the story. It's a lot of all of these conflicts. Every chapter in the story gives us some example of a test that Crispin has to go through, a new friend that Crispin meets, and a new enemy that he meets. So for your example for Crispin, why don't you come up with one example of a challenge he has, and a friend that he makes, and I would say it's not the same person as our mentor, somebody different, and then a new enemy, and it's not an enemy we've already met before, but a new enemy. In stage 5, we experience an ordeal. And at this point, our hero is facing the biggest test so far. He hits rock bottom, maybe confronts his greatest fear up to this point. Something big happens. It's not necessarily the biggest thing yet, but something big happens. And a lot of times it's where I'm thinking of Crispin has to overcome a pretty big fear on his own, which leads us then to the supreme ordeal. Oops, sorry, keep forgetting about that. So in our supreme ordeal, now we're hitting the climax. Now the outcome of the story is about to be decided. Okay, some event, a final test, is going to allow our protagonist to finally get to go back home. It's not going to be an easy test, okay, but it's going to be them maybe coming back. So maybe they experience some kind of a setback from the ordeal, but now they come back from that, okay, and overcome the supreme ordeal. And when this is done, the story starts to take a downhill climb. We're right at the peak of the story. Something big happens, and it's going to change the story and let it just come to resolution. So stage 7 is the reward. And in the reward, our character gets some object, something maybe, or maybe it's something that's not tangible. Maybe it's knowledge that the hero has been fighting for throughout the whole book, and they finally learn it or they finally get it. Okay, so again, it's not something necessarily that you can touch. So I want you to think about what would that reward be for Crispin. And I'm going to tell you, it's not like he's going to get an object like a trophy or something. He's going to learn something, that he's going to find out something that's going to change him, that's going to help him, and he's going to go home a different person. Okay, and this gets us into our resolution. And finally, the journey home. Our character returns to the ordinary world. And in this case, when we think of the ordinary world is he's still going to be, Crispin, but he's changed. And usually that change is an internal change. He's stronger, he's better in some way. So maybe jot down some details about how is Crispin different now than he was from the beginning. How do you think he's going to be able to now survive in the world? He has no mother. At the beginning, there was a lot of question how he was going to survive without a parent. But now he's gone through a bunch of trials. He's learned so much. How has he changed? Okay, and so that's kind of the cycle of how our story goes through. On Friday, you're going to get to do an essay, and you can pick whether to write about the theme, or you can pick about 3 different stages. We just talked about 8 different stages in the hero's journey. You're going to pick the 3 that you want to use for your body paragraph. All right? I do expect that these notes will be taken and that you'll have something to discuss tomorrow. Okay, that is your first task for today.